Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Mattson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. Well, today we're going to talk about youth. Anxiety, depression, and suicide rates are threatening all around, especially among our youth today. Youth leaders are on the front lines as they're trying to navigate this unique times and the unique challenges that the youth are facing in light of pandemic, social unrest, and in our area, we've got fires. Jeff and I were in youth ministry for years, and we have a great compassion and respect for those who are leading today.
Yeah, that's why we're bringing you two of the best youth pastors we know. Tyler Eaton and Jen Guldbranson are both on full-time staff for many years at Rolling Hills Community Church just outside Portland, Oregon, where our family has been. And we even worked for the better part of, 20 years. We've been there now. And we might be a bit biased as we get to see these two serving our family and then so many families in our community. But we are so happy to have them. They are awesome. Welcome, Tyler and Jen.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so we're excited to get to listen and learn more about you two today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, in our audience, about who you are, why you chose youth ministry. Tyler, let's start with you.
Yeah. My name is Tyler Eaton, and I currently serve on staff at Rolling Hills as the middle school pastor. Been on staff in some shape or form for almost 20 years now. Started as an intern with worship, and over the last almost 2 decades have just grown in that position and different opportunities, from worship to more pastoral to oversight of the middle school ministry, and where I still am today. Been at Rolling Hills since I was in first grade, so it is my home away from home. I met my wife there, who we've been married for 14 years to my wife, Kate. We have 3 wonderful kids, Nora, who is 9, Gwen, who is 6, and Max, who is 3. And so currently learning how to do the whole distant learning thing, like so many people I assume are figuring out as well. But, in short, youth ministry, I think when it comes down to it, it's a calling first and foremost. And when I think of my time in middle school and just how transformative that was for me, I think, when you take away all the craziness and the awkwardness and all the fun that comes with middle school ministry, there's such a growth from that 6th to 8th grade where decisions are made. And I've seen that first and foremost in my own life, and the impact of countless either youth workers, small group leaders, friends of parents. The fact that I get to do that now it's a humbling thing, but yet it's something that just believe in so much and so passionate about. And I think a big part of what has made these last 20 years of ministry so special is the people I get to serve alongside with. And so that's where I really get to enjoy serving with Jen and having the longevity of ministry together when you do it with like-minded people.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Jen Guldbranson, and let's see, I have been on staff at Rolling Hills for 23 years. This summer was a big celebration for me, and of those 23 years, only 22 of it that was middle school, and for the last year, I have now been the student ministries pastor, so I oversee middle school and high school, and so I have learned to be a supervisor, and then COVID happened, so that was a big learning here for me. So Rolling Hills is, yes, it's where I work and it's where I'm a pastor, but it is It's our faith family. So my husband, Darren, I've been married to him for 22 years, and we have 2 kids. And I am a mom of a middle schooler. So I have a student that's in our ministry, my daughter Milena, who's 13, and then I have a 10-year-old son, Joel. And so it's really been fun. I came and I was single, and when I started my pastoral ministry at Rolling Hills, and to get married and then have kids, and now to have a kid in our ministry is a whole nother layer of depth that it's so fun. It's just brought another layer in our ministry. So calling in a youth ministry came 22 years ago when I was on a tram in Brazil to see Christ the Redeemer statue, and God said, it's time for you to go into ministry. And I was like, did I just hear the right thing?
And his arms were stretched out.
That's right.
Right there.
That's right.
Welcome, Jen, to the fold.
And I love it. And one thing that I think has been so fun is, like Tyler was saying, is to see our students' lives be transformed by Jesus. But I think the thing that I loved also is watching our small group leaders and the rock stars they are, and watching them be the pastors to our students. It's been a really fun journey, and I'm so grateful that God has allowed me to do it for this many years.
Well, just observing as people that work with leaders on all different fronts, a couple of things that we're hearing that are pretty rare gems. One is the longevity, and to be serving in the same church that you grew up in, and to have such faithfulness in the same community for such a long period, drip after drip after drip, and to still love it and to still have passion. We're going to talk about kind of the ebbs and flow of that, but that is super rare, especially today. Yeah. Everybody's in and out. We want quick, and we want to climb ladders really fast. And so the reality of who you two are, I think that just says so much. The other thing that I'm hearing that I just want to make sure we point out for our listeners is the impact that you have on shepherding others and helping others become leaders, whether that's your students or those that are serving your students. It's been phenomenal to watch, and it is an example for many. So we want to learn from you today, because that is hard to do, especially in youth ministry.
But so rewarding.
So let's start with talking about kids. What, after all these years that you've sat with kids, what are you seeing that kids are needing most today, especially during what's happening currently in this pandemic?
I think people, more than anything, it's that connection, because all of our connections have been taken away. Mm-hmm. And saying small connections kind of is misleading, but it's that, just those interactions that we used to just have and we've taken for granted, just seeing people. And I think that is going to weigh on our kids actually long term. And that's not my field, is mental health, but I really do think that's one thing that is really impacting them right now. They're tired of their screens, which is interesting for a student to be tired of a screen, because normally you're taking it away from them. Right. But I think that's one major thing, is they're missing that connection with one another.
Yeah. I would just tag along that too. I think before COVID, before all the distant social distancing and restrictions and isolating, and there's studies out there where, kids believe that community was found in the digital sense, whether it's through Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, TikTok, things like that. And so they didn't really prioritize or really understand what they had until it was taken from them. And so there's a part of me that is hoping and praying that, out of the ashes, that some of the beauty that we get to see within the church and in the context of youth ministry really is coming this full circle of face-to-face relationships. Mm-hmm. And it was almost kind of like, all right, you want to be on your phones, you want to have screens, and you think this is it, then you're going to get it 100%, and then they realize just how, at the end of the day, like, empty it is, and yes, there's connection, but it's not the connection that is self-fulfilling and life-giving. And so I'm hoping and praying that, especially for our context at Rolling Hills, we're kind of a commuter youth group. And so it's not like we have one campus that is predominantly, that makes up our middle school ministry. We probably have upwards of almost a dozen campuses that make up. And so there's, you have your school friends, but then you also have your church friends. And even in that context, you deal with cliques and things like that. And so I'm hoping and praying that that there will be that breakdown of some of those things, that when kids are able to be back together, and as we've started to have some in-person things, we've seen some of the beauty of that as small groups have gotten together, even if they can't hug and be together and stuff, but just being in the presence of each other. It's like, we're not seeing kids even reach for their phones once,
Wow.
And
That's
when it's
awesome.
time for them to be picked up or going, it's us telling them, your parents here are not, Mom, come pick me up, I'm bored, which would kind of, we would see before. And so I think there's going to be a resurgence of unity and community in the body of Christ. And so I'm excited to see how that plays out in the weeks and months ahead.
That is just so encouraging, because so many parents are worried that this online school and online way of life is going to create larger addictions. And yes, as a mental health provider, there are some possible ways that will happen, but it's so encouraging to hear that they're not even reaching. They're just so starving for this eye-to-eye, face-to-face connection. And so that's the hope. If you're listening in, take a deep breath and go, okay, there's probably going to be something really good on the other side of this.
You guys, what has practically changed for you as you think about rethinking how to do ministry? Now, we've seen some of this and participated in some of the things you guys have come up with, which is awesome. So creative and innovative. Heart and time and sacrifice on your guys' part, it shows. It's made a difference in our own girls' lives. So thank you for that as a dad. But what would you say? I mean, tell our audience a little bit about what you guys have been doing, what's changed for you during this pandemic, the racial injustice piece, the wildfires here in Oregon that have impacted literal families that evacuated. We almost had to. My goodness, I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Tell and inspire some folks as to what might encourage them in their navigation of ministry.
Yeah. I think with a lot of the things that have played out in our culture over the last 6 months, from, starting back with George Floyd, and then moving, especially being here in Portland and seeing, 100+ days of demonstrations. Some have been peaceful, some have not been peaceful, as you've probably have seen in the mainstream media and how that's been portrayed. And then, you throw in COVID, you throw in the forest fires. I mean, it feels like it's just been one thing after the next. We think, oh, it's the light at the end of the tunnel. And no, it's just another train coming through.
Are we going to have a flood here soon? Or is there a sandstorm coming?
And I think what's been so hard and I don't think it's just a student thing. I think it's adults too. Someone that was telling me this, and it really was like kind of an aha thing, is I think since we're in isolation and processing this, as much as we can, the role of social media, it almost like it demands like an instant stance on how you feel on something. And so we're seeing a lot of our kids on social media, make statements, retweet things, repost things, share things on their stories that they think, is the right thing to do out of an emotional response because they feel bad for situations, but, really missing on opportunities to process things through a theological or through a biblical worldview, and just where's the hope that we find in this? As yes, there's things that policies, yes, there's things that reform, yes, there's things like that can push us towards a resolution, but really what is the hope that surpasses all the evil that we're seeing play out in our world? And that's Christ. And I think for a lot of our students, not having that weekly touch point in a corporate gathering of the body of Christ in youth ministry, I think is something that has been a deficit for them. I think personally for me, when I'm looking at administering how we've done it, I don't think it's something I would ever want to admit, but I think we've been brought to a place to realize how much we rely on programs. And we rely on programs as a means to an end for relationships, rather than looking at going after relationships. And as a byproduct, we might have some programs that can come out of that because of common interests or common needs. And even on the drive over here, here we are in the fall, we're getting ready to launch, some sort of hybrid in-person online small groups for our student ministries. And more developments are coming out today where we're finding ourselves back at the drawing board, and we're hoping to launch in 2 weeks, And so it's like, it's constantly, it's kind of like, okay, well, if programs can't happen, that doesn't mean that relationships and discipleship and life, God is so much bigger than that. And so, but I'm finding myself how often I might have put my trust in programs rather than the relationships. And so God's really been stretching me and challenging me in that area. And so when we're trying to be responsive to that we're going after the relationship and meeting the needs of these students and not just doing what we've done before because that's what's the quote unquote normal, but because of the need of the students that God's entrusted us with.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because that's exactly what my answer is going to be, is when you do it for so long, you know that camp is going to be amazing. You know that, you just got to tweak things for your in-person small group ministry. And so when everything came to a halt and we had to innovate really quick, it was first when you say, let's innovate, let's kind of put a Band-Aid on it. We're just doing this, until Easter, I think is what we used to say.
Right, I remember that.
And then it was like, okay, maybe the end of school. I remember crying for days because I knew we were going to have to cancel camp. And I remember thinking, but we've done that camp almost 2 decades, and we know how God's Spirit moves. And to go, we're not going to have this. And the realization, I remember the Lord talking to me, like kind of saying to me, is I move despite if you have that camp. And my spirit is going to do the work my spirit needs to do. And just going, oh yeah, it's so easy to place your trust in what you know works. And God has had to remind me that no, I move and I work despite these circumstances. I also think that brings such a peace to it, because what we're doing, there's no handbook for anyone. It's not like, oh, someone's experienced this and what did they have to say, And so it's just kind of that reminder that the Lord is going to guide our steps, because like Tyler was saying, just when we think we've got a really great plan, next thing we know it, within 2 weeks, we're on plan. Like Seriously. 7 steps down. So it's like, oh, that was plan A and now we're on plan G, And so I'm not going to lie. It's exhausting. It is.
Yeah.
But it's also been really neat to see what God has walked us through, to be able to look back now and to see my team is so innovative. They're amazing. And what we have kind of joined together and said, this is what we can do together it's been really amazing to watch. And so where we're at today is not where we were in March. Good thing, but we're still having, it's not kind of like, we can't like let up. Like we have to continue that innovation. So we'll leave here and go innovate some more.
Well, and I think the thing that I've been reminded of too is where Paul talks about your labor's not in vain. And so Jen and I, we meet monthly with other youth pastors in our area, just as a support group and networking and praying for each other. We're talking about how comparison, before you'd always compare what, the church down the street is doing or other things. And so then when COVID hit and like Jen said, no one knows what they're doing, like this is going to be the great neutralizer. We're never going to have to deal with comparison again. And now as things are being reopening and different churches are interpreting, different suggestions and regulations differently, it's hard to sit there because you can compare again, like, well, I'm doing things that they can't, or they're doing things that I wish I could. And so that's not fair, and so then you can really get, not be in a good place if you allow your mind to go there and give the enemy a footstep, and just reminding ourselves that, even if we're not able to do ministry the way that other churches or other parachurch organizations are able to do, what we are doing, our work is not in vain, and that God is going to do that. He's going to use the possible to overcome the impossible. And so we just take hope that whatever we do, like Jen said, no matter how many times we have to change it and flip it around, that not to be frustrated and not to compare, but to trust that God's given us vision and purpose and to live that out the best that we can.
Yeah.
Parents feel the pressure to parent well. But life, especially right now, that's hard. This is why we're so excited to announce that Jeff and I will be speaking at the online Perfectly Imperfect Christian Parenting event on October 23rd and 24th. This completely digital event was designed for parents like us to set aside perfection and receive the practical and spiritual help we need in an easy and accessible digital format, and we're just so excited to be speaking at the event. The goal is to help you check perfection at the door or the couch and become the perfectly imperfect parent God has called you to be. Jeff and I are going to be speaking specifically on communication and conflict resolution. I mean, who doesn't have conflict in their marriage and between their kids? And how do we actually teach and practice how to be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen? These are the tools that we want to equip you with because they are lifelong skills. In addition to our talk, there will be over 40 other short consumable talks giving you both practical and spiritual advice from some other amazing speakers, such as Aaron and Jamie Ivey, Mark Batterson, Jonathan Pitts, and the Duck Dynasty crew. So many more speakers as well. So register today for this digital Christian parenting event at livingwholehearted.com. You'll find all the details and you can register right there. Again, October 23rd and 24th, and we so look forward to seeing you there.
We've been around you guys long enough to know that your hearts are in this for the right reasons, and that you love the Lord and you depend on His Spirit, and you would never say this about yourself, so we're saying it about you. We see this, and in that heart and mindset, with all the highs and lows of real life and parenting and marriage and trying to do ministry and trying to adapt to all of the external factors that are so difficult, that character, that heart, that stay in step with the Spirit in Galatians 5, you're doing that. And it's not like, easy, but it's fun to see. Like you said, Jen, it's fun to see what God's taken you through, how He's walked you through these things. And that is a difference between what it's like in walking with God and His Spirit, and not in the sense, and the temptations are there, right? To climb the competency ladders, the comparisons, all that. I mean, right? You guys are living this out. And on the note of relationship, you drove all the way out hundreds of miles on cars. Tyler,
yes.
You and Connor, wasn't it? I mean, to go and to hand deliver a welcome packet to our new sixth grader and sixth graders in the community. That's just you backing that up, that conviction. It's beautiful to see. And man, we just so appreciate the fact that that's the heart you're bringing to youth ministry, and continue to want to bring it to youth ministry, humble, depending on God. So thank you for that.
Well, I think what was so cool, and Jen and I were doing that with the new sixth graders, is I think another thing that I've learned through this is, we've always talked about partnering with parents and just how we want to do these things. But before, there were just so many different venues of information being thrown in our families before COVID. We didn't know what was working, what was sticking, what was just white noise. And I think all of us parents, when all of a sudden we put on the teacher role back in the spring and realized, a newfound respect for, our education system and teachers, whether public school, private school, and even in the homeschool community too. Like it has impacted everybody. But I think that's even spilled over now into the church world, the spiritual development. Yes, like the home is the primary place for spiritual coaching and development, but we also recognize that a lot of our students don't come from faith-based homes. And so where are they getting that development, or parents who feel ill-equipped to do that? And so now, Jen and I driving around and meeting a lot of these new sixth graders, who a lot of them are firstborn, so we don't know these families. And so being able to connect with parents and being like, when we say we want to partner, like we really want to do that. And so I think that's the other thing I was talking about before, like kids and relationships. The thing I'm excited for coming out of this is really this new era of partnering with parents and really seeing that unity of giving our parents tools and knowing that we are for them. We're not trying to compete against the busyness of school and sports and things like that and try to make them feel like this is just one more thing they need to do with their kids, but really as like we're here together as the body of Christ. And so we've seen glimpses of that, and we've heard stories of that, which has been encouraging to hear that. And so that's been our heartbeat. And so we're excited to see this go to new levels that maybe wouldn't have never happened if it wasn't for COVID.
Well, talk to that parent out there who didn't get a visit from their youth pastor, or that, again, they're maybe a little more isolated. What would you encourage them in these times with not having the extra support of their youth ministry programs? What would you encourage them to be focusing on during this time with their youth?
Well, if the pastor won't come to their house, go to their house.
Yeah, exactly. If you're a pastor, go to their house.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just having conversations with our student, our kids, and kind of hearing what, their frustrations, and just being ready to listen to that, and maybe just asking them, this has been a trying time. How, what are you thinking about all this? How is it, how's your relationship with God in it? My son, who is a 10-year-old, we were talking during the fires and we were talking about 2020 and he said, is this the worst year of your life, Mom? And I was like,
A great question.
Well, it's kind of pretty close. And then I was able to share with him actually what I would deem the worst year of my life. And we got to talk about it. And I got to tell him how God brought me through that.
Yeah.
And so it's just being in those moments. It's just taking what we're going through and showing them what God is doing in our lives and that he's real in us. And so, because our kids see through everything, right? Like if we're playing a game, they're going to see it. And so just having those moments of really just talking through those things and how God is with us in the midst of it and taking time maybe to, watch your church service together or things like that. But I think it's just that open communication and just encouraging them to keep going, I think is really, one area that I have just seen effective with my own kids. And so, and also celebrating those wins. We need to celebrate the wins, right? Because it is so hard because, that distance learning. There's a lot of not wins. And so, so I think that's one thing that kind of really talking to our kids about that as well.
And I would just encourage parents that I think so many times we allow the fear of not having the answer to start spiritual conversations with our kids. And it's okay to not have the answers and open up to time, kind of like how Jen compared, bad years with Joel versus her life story and sharing into that. And if your student have questions, like big questions that you don't know how to answer, like when have been times in your faith journey that you've had questions that have gone unanswered, and how have you trusted God during the times of the unknown? And to be real, like middle school is the time, especially for those that have grown up in a Christian family, is where you see that shift of making my faith my own and not my mom and dad's faith. And so there's naturally going to be questions. There's naturally going to be doubts. There's naturally going to be opposition, maybe even at times. And so don't be fearful of that, but at the same time, engage in that and provide a safe place where students can feel, your kids can have those conversations with you, and you're not the fixer. You're not trying to, shut it down or anything like that. You look at Jesus, when people would come and ask him questions, more times than not, he would respond with questions.
That's right.
and let them wrestle and live in that tension. Because I think that's what grows our faith. Because if we're just spoon feeding them answers, like textbook answers and things like that, or because the Bible says so, they might walk away from that conversation. And you're like, oh, pat myself on the back. I really did a good job there. But when time comes and they're put into crisis, and what they're going to be drawing from that self-discovery of their faith, especially in adolescence, that's what cements the trajectory of a strong faith. And so embrace the awkwardness, embrace the fears, embrace the doubts, and at the same time invite them into the same fears and doubts you've had growing up in your own faith.
Mm-hmm. One thing I think is really neat, though, is we're so busy. Like we're going here and there and everywhere, and this has caused us to slow down and stop. And to think about that as parents, that we might not ever have this again. They're not going anywhere, even though you're like, sometimes you wish they were going somewhere, they're like, go somewhere for a couple hours. But I think it's pretty amazing that we are getting this opportunity to spend so much time together as a family. And it can be discouraging at moments, but I think for us to kind of sit back and realize that's such a gift that God has given us.
I love that because honestly, I think the disconnect, the teen you were talking about, middle school, high school, they start to notice the incongruencies in us as parents, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And there, with this time, there's a opportunity for more repair, slowness, for some more dialogues, so we can fill in the cracks. Because usually they're just watching us, one moment and then drawing conclusions, and then they move on with their life. But there's this opportunity right now to have the conversation you talked about earlier, where there's a question, and you can actually share more of our stories as mom and dad.
Yeah.
And they're learning more of our humanity
Yeah.
and all of our imperfections, but we have time to actually close some loops. And I just really think that's been powerful.
And I was to say too, I think sometimes our students or our kids appreciate hearing stories that aren't wrapped up in a beautiful bow at the end and stuff. And like, where there's been times in all of our lives where we feel God has maybe left us hanging on something we've been praying for, something we've been seeking after, working hard toward, things we felt had been unfair for whatever reason. And I think students love hearing stories of where obviously answers have been given to their prayers and what they were seeking after. But I think a lot of times hearing stories where, it hasn't been a bed of roses, it makes them realize, okay, so I'm not the only one. Because the enemy wants to like isolate us and make us feel like we're not good at what we're trying to go after in our faith. I'm not a good follower of Jesus. Am I even these voices, these lies and stuff. And when no one else is honest and shares it, they wrestle with that too, whether they follow Jesus for a year or 40 plus years, we still wrestle with those thoughts at times. And so I think that transparency that is appropriate age level, how you would talk to your high school or your middle school student is very different than, your second or first grader or preschooler, but you can still communicate those type of things. I think that watching, and don't worry about your example being perfect. Mm-hmm. They don't want perfection. Mm-hmm. They want to see raw. They want to see real, because their life is raw and real and maybe right there with you.
Absolutely. And let me throw in my geeky mental health moment here and you would say this too, I'm guessing, back me up. But if I'm feeling sad about something, that teen little brain is multiplied by 10. And so needing to be honest or pretending it's not that bad. I mean, these kids feel things at enormous rates. Everything is multiplied and intensified in that growing brain. So that honesty and imperfection is so important, because it helps them feel more normal in a very abnormal time in life.
Right. It's like I was thinking just yesterday, we were all impatient with each other. And after it all happened, I was talking to my kids in the kitchen. I'm like, so we've been all pretty impatient with each other with this social, this distance learning. Let's do better. Let's do better. And it was like, and I had that moment where like you were saying, maybe pre-COVID, I probably, we would have just gone on to do our own things, but it was like, well, we're not going anywhere, so we have to work this out. So, but yeah, I think if I was feeling, stressed out and overwhelmed, they were feeling way more,
there you go.
And so, yeah, it's just it's realizing those moments, and I think articulating them sometimes for our students.
Jen, talk a little bit about how long you guys have been doing ministry and the principles you've been learning over the years. Speak to that.
Yeah. So because I've been at Rolling Hills at one church for 23 years, one thing that I have seen that has really benefited my ministry was, because I've been there so long, people know who I am, and they kind of know my track record, and they know that I care for these kids. And what's really great is that I have seen students that came in as sixth graders, and then now they're adults and they're coming back and serving and things like that. But when youth pastors, because they have sometimes about a 2-year consistency at churches. And so one thing that I've benefited from is, because of being there so long, I have a track record and I have consistency. So it creates a trust level with my families. And that doesn't come quick. It comes with years. Working with younger youth pastors, that's the one thing I'm like, if you can stick with it, because the grass isn't greener on the other side. Every church has broken people, because we're all broken people,
Amen, sister.
That we're being transformed by Jesus. And so it's not going to be better at this other place, even though it may seem like it. And also believing that people really, for the most part, are doing the best they can. And kind of, and going, I'm trying to do the best I can, and I'm going to assume that of you. And so I think that's also been something that I've learned.
Yeah. And I think the longevity that comes with serving in any ministry, but I think youth ministry in particular, I've seen a lot of great youth ministries in the greater Portland area that have rise and fall based off of a personality or an individual. And so when you think the ministry is about you, your leadership, that's when you put all your eggs in that basket. And so inadvertently when a transition comes, whether it's a healthy or abrupt or whatever, that can make or break a ministry. And so that mindset, that concept of reproducing yourself in the lives of others, like working yourself out of a job, if anything, it gives you more longevity because you're releasing volunteers to do the work of the kingdom in the lives of our students. And so we call our small group leaders pastors because they're on the front lines. And so, it comes with the territory when there's tragedy or there's hardships that come in the lives of our students. Our feelings are not hurt when they're calling their small group leaders first. When we're hearing about things secondhand through our small group leaders in a really hard and sad situation, there's beauty in there because our leaders are doing what they should be doing. And so I think that's another thing about longevity is that humility, that teachability, that middle school ministry. It's not a stepping stone ministry. It's not a pathway to something greater unless that's God's calling on your life. Then awesome, go for it. But I think there's a lot at stake at middle school and high school ministry. It's not just fun and games when you work with youth, that, eternity is on the line. And so I think working with volunteers, being humble and making it not about you, then you will thrive and you will experience longevity and experience your calling to the fullest.
So end with this. Speak to that youth pastor who is just on that tipping point and is exhausted. Add on a pandemic and they're really at their end. Just end with a word of encouragement for that pastor.
I don't love youth ministry because it's easy, but I love it because it's worth it. And you're going to succeed. You're going to fail, but you're not alone. You are not their savior. Our job is to point them to their savior. And so when you feel you don't have the answer, you feel you can't take one more critique or one more angry parent or one more ounce of negativity, be reminded of who you are, your identity in Christ, your calling that's there. And if it's where God has placed you right now, then fighting the battles is worth it. And when you get through the other side, you will be a better leader because of it. You will be a better pastor because of it. But you're also, if you're at a place where you feel that it is not healthy for you to be right now, then trusting in God's timing and be obedient to where he's leading you. But don't give up simply because it's hard or you're discouraged. Because as cliche as it is, comparing yourself to others, it is the thief of joy, and the enemy's role and his mandate is to seek, kill, and destroy. And so he is out and about. And being isolated and doing ministry from afar, it's easy to allow those emotions just to compound. And so stick with it, be strong, surround yourself with like-minded people, surround yourself with people who are both in the trenches and out of the trenches that can speak truth over you and give you perspective when you aren't able to see the perspective that is reality.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is a core value I live by is to do hard things. This occupation is hard and it can be really discouraging, but to kind of push into that, if it is like a completely unhealthy environment, you have to make choices. But one thing I would really encourage people, if they feel really kind of at the end, seek professional counseling. I found myself in that place a couple years ago. The hardship of ministry kind of hit a tipping point for me. And I went to someone that, loves Jesus, and it was a professional counselor. And it was freeing to be able to have a safe place to talk about it. And they could differentiate what was something that was just hard that I needed to walk through, and maybe something that was unhealthy that I needed to let go. And it's the Spirit, man, it gave that person so much wisdom. I was like, how does someone know me so well? And I am a better pastor because I did that. And so I would say if they find themselves in that place, seek counseling. And then find people that have walked this path before you that maybe aren't your friends. Because having people that are wise, older in years, they can give you a perspective that we really need to have as a sounding board. Because sometimes our friends might not want to always hear it, but also have those people in our life that have walked it. So having that kind of circle around you, I think can really help you kind of go, all right, How do I navigate what the Spirit is leading me through this trial?
It's so good. Oh, thank you, Pastor Jen and Pastor Tyler. You guys are really walking in faithfulness and having this slow and steady drip over time in a long history. We've had the privilege to watch kids that you've mentored and discipled and to see who they are as adults. It's pretty phenomenal. And so thank you for the wisdom you're sharing. And we're just so grateful for who you are. Thank you.
If you know a youth leader in your community, take time to encourage them. They need to be reminded of their important role today. And if you are parenting or mentoring youth, remember that who you are matters more than what you can ever do for them. And Tyler and Jen spoke about that, not only in what they're trying to do with their own kids, but they also encouraged and edified us, as everyone that might be a parent out there, about how you could do that in real time today. Take the time to do that. Our kids need you. Your kids need you to show up, be honest, and be present. Mm-hmm. If you want to learn more about our resources, counseling, and coaching, visit www.livingwholehearted.com. And don't forget to get your own copy of our first co-authored book that just is coming out October 1, Shrinking the Integrity Gap Between What Leaders Preach and Live, or the book that Tara wrote, Courageous, Being Daughters Rooted in Grace. Those are 2 resources to help you move the needle on some of what we discussed today. And Jen, will you be willing to close us in prayer?
Absolutely. Lord, I thank you so much for this opportunity for us to just share just the incredible students that we each know and love. And I just pray, Lord, that as we think about the influence we have on people maybe that are younger than us or our peers, I pray, Lord, that you would just guide our words, guide our actions. May we be the real deal to the people around us. May our relationship with you be growing, honest, and the people around us can see that and that want the same thing. And so, Lord, I just thank you so much that you are a God that loves us and cares for us, and you journey with us. And we just commit this day to you. In your name, amen.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.